If this sounds unbelievable, that's fine. I wouldn't believe it either if it hadn't happened to me. I'm only telling this now because enough time has passed, and because the man who could confirm it is dead. Names are changed, locations are blurred, but everything else is exactly how I remember it, down to the smallest details that still keep me up at night. This happened when I was 26, during a stretch of my life where I was driving long distances almost every week for work. In late October of 2019, I was working contract jobs installing commercial HVAC systems in small towns across the Midwest. The pay was decent, but the schedule was brutal. Most weeks, I'd finish a job in one town around 9 or 10 p.m., then drive 2 or 3 hours to the next location to start fresh the following morning. The company covered hotels, but they were always the cheapest option available. Places where the continental breakfast was stale muffins and the Wi-Fi worked maybe half the time. I didn't mind the driving, though. Something about those long, empty stretches of highway at night was almost meditative. No boss breathing down my neck, no coworkers making small talk. Just me, the road, and whatever podcast or audiobook I could find with decent reception. That particular week, I'd been working in a town called Fairmont, population maybe 3,000, installing ductwork in a new medical clinic. The job had run long because the electrical contractor had messed up their part, which meant we couldn't close up the ceiling until they fixed their mistakes. By the time I packed up my tools and loaded the van, it was already past 11 p.m. I punched the address of my next hotel into my phone's GPS. Estimated arrival, 1:47 a.m. Great. I stopped at a gas station on the edge of town, one of those run-down places with flickering fluorescent lights and a clerk who barely looked up from his phone when I paid for coffee and a pack of gum. The coffee was burnt and tasted like it had been sitting on the burner since dinner rush, but I drank it anyway. I pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto State Highway 47, heading west. The highway was one of those two-lane roads that cuts straight through farmland for miles without deviation. No curves, no hills, just flat, endless darkness on both sides. During the day, you could see for miles, cornfields, silos, the occasional farmhouse set back from the road, but at night, the world just disappeared. Your headlights only reached maybe 200 feet ahead, and everything beyond that was a black void. No streetlights, no traffic, no radio reception, just static and the occasional faint signal from some AM station playing country music I didn't recognize. I turned the radio off after a few minutes. The silence was better. I remember checking the dashboard display as I settled into the drive. Time, 11:32 p.m. Outside temperature, 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Cold but not freezing, just that sharp late autumn chill where your breath fogs up the windshield if the defroster isn't running. I adjusted the heater to a comfortable level. Warm enough to keep my hands from getting stiff, but not so hot that I'd start dozing off. The monotony of the drive started to set in. My thoughts drifted. I thought about the job waiting for me tomorrow. I thought about whether I'd have time to grab breakfast before the site opened. I thought about how much longer I could keep doing this kind of work before it wore me down completely. Somewhere around mile marker 34, I passed an old grain elevator that looked abandoned. Rusted metal siding, broken windows, weeds growing through cracks in the concrete pad. I'd driven past it dozens of times before, but that night, something about it looked different. Lonelier, maybe. Like it had been forgotten by everyone except the road itself. About 40 minutes into the drive, I saw him. At first, I thought it was a road sign or maybe a piece of debris someone had left on the shoulder. Then the shape moved, just slightly, and I realized it was a person. A man. He was standing just past a gentle curve in the road, far enough ahead that I almost missed him in the darkness. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, and wearing what looked like a dark coat. Navy blue or black, I couldn't tell. One arm was raised. Not waving frantically like someone in distress. Not moving at all, actually. I've driven past hitchhikers before, and never once considered stopping. My parents drilled it into me as a teenager. Never pick up strangers. Every true crime show I'd ever watched reinforced the same message. But something about this felt different. The road was completely empty. I hadn't seen another car in over 30 minutes. There were no houses visible, no porch lights, no farm buildings, nothing. Just fields on both sides stretching into the dark. And the way he was standing there, so still, so calm, it didn't feel threatening. It felt sad. I slowed down without fully deciding to. As I got closer, I could make out more details. He wasn't shivering. That was the first thing that struck me as odd. It was 34 degrees outside. When I cracked my window earlier to toss out an empty coffee cup, my breath had fogged instantly, but this guy was standing on the shoulder in a coat, no gloves, no hat, and he wasn't moving at all. No shifting weight from foot to foot, no rubbing his hands together, no hunching his shoulders against the cold, just standing there. That should have been my cue to keep driving. Instead, I eased off the gas and pulled onto the shoulder about 20 feet ahead of him. I put the car in park, but left the engine running. I lowered the passenger side window about halfway, not all the way. Some instinctive part of me still wanted a barrier between us. "Everything okay?" I called out. He walked toward the car slowly, not in a hurry, not stumbling, just a normal, measured pace. As he got closer, the headlights lit up his face. He was pale. Not sickly pale, not like someone who was ill, but pale in the way people get when they spend all their time indoors, like he hadn't seen sunlight in months. His hair was dark, cut short, but not recently. His coat was buttoned up, but I couldn't see any branding or logos on it, just plain, nondescript. He stopped a few feet from the door and leaned slightly toward the window, but he didn't rest his hands on the car, didn't lean in too close. "Yeah," he said. His voice was calm, soft, almost tired. "My car broke down a few miles back. I've been trying to get a ride for a while." I asked where he was headed. He named a town I recognized, Harrington. It was about an hour west, right along my route. I'd driven through it a dozen times. That coincidence made the decision feel safer than it was. "Hop in," I said. He opened the door and sat down. The first thing I noticed, and I mean the very first thing, was the smell. Or rather, the lack of one. When you open a car door on a cold night, there's always a rush of air. You feel it. You smell it. The cold has a smell. Crisp, earthy, sometimes with a faint metallic edge. But when he opened that door, nothing changed. No cold air rushed in, no smell of damp clothes or sweat, no scent of cigarettes, cologne, or even the faint odor of someone who'd been standing outside for hours. It was like the air inside the car and the air outside were exactly the same. I glanced over as I shifted back into drive and pulled onto the highway. He was sitting upright in the passenger seat, hands folded loosely in his lap, staring straight ahead through the windshield. "Long night?" I asked, mostly to fill the silence. "Longer than I expected," he replied. His tone was normal, conversational, but something about the way he said it felt off, like he wasn't really talking to me. I waited for him to elaborate, but he didn't. He just kept staring forward. No adjustment of his coat, no shifting his weight to get comfortable. No glance at the dashboard, the radio, or the rearview mirror. Just sitting there, perfectly still. Like he'd already been in that seat for hours and settled into it completely. I tried to brush it off. Some people are just awkward, I told myself. Maybe he's tired. Maybe he's been stranded so long he's just zoned out. But the longer we drove, the more I noticed other things. About 5 minutes into the drive, I realized he hadn't blinked. Not once. I wasn't staring at him. I was keeping my eyes on the road, but in my peripheral vision, I could see him. And his eyes never moved, never closed, just fixed straight ahead, unblinking, like he was looking at something far beyond the windshield. I turned the heater up slightly. The vents were blowing warm air, but the temperature inside the car felt colder than it should. Not freezing, not unbearable, just wrong, like the warmth wasn't reaching the passenger side. I glanced at the digital clock on the dashboard. 11:52 p.m. The display was bright, one of those blue LED screens that reflects faintly off the windows at night. I could see my own reflection in the driver's side window. Faint, but there. But when I glanced at the passenger side window, I didn't see his. I told myself it was just the angle, just the way the light was hitting the glass. But my hands tightened on the steering wheel anyway. We drove in silence for another few minutes before I tried to make conversation again. "So, what do you do for work?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. There was a pause, not long, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, but it felt deliberate, like he was deciding whether to answer at all. "I used to travel a lot," he said finally. Used to. That phrase stuck with me. "What kind of work?" I pressed. Another pause. "Different things," he said. "Nothing that matters now." His voice had gotten quieter, flatter. I asked where he was from. "Near here," he said. Near here could mean anything. Near here could be 10 miles or 50. I was about to ask him to clarify when he spoke again. "You ever drive the same road twice and feel like it changed?" The question caught me completely off guard. I guess," I said, glancing over at him. "Why do you ask?" "Sometimes," he continued, still staring forward, "places remember things." I forced a laugh. That's kind of a creepy thought. He didn't smile, didn't react at all. "No," he said quietly. "It's worse than that." "What do you mean?" I asked. He turned his head toward me for the first time since getting in the car. And that's when I saw his eyes. They weren't glowing, they weren't black or bloodshot or anything dramatic like that. They were just empty. Like they weren't focusing on anything. Like he was looking through me instead of at me. "Some roads," he said slowly, "only let you leave once." I didn't know what to say to that. I turned my attention back to the road, my pulse quickening. The heater was still running, but I could feel goosebumps rising on my arms. The air inside the car had gotten noticeably colder. I checked the vents again. Warm air was definitely coming out. But it didn't matter. The cold was coming from somewhere else. I glanced at the passenger again. He was sitting in the exact same position, hands folded, staring forward. And then I noticed something I hadn't before. His chest wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. A few minutes later, though it felt like an eternity, I saw a road sign up ahead. A rusted green sign with white lettering. Harrington, 2 miles. The name of the town he'd mentioned earlier. But something about the sign was wrong. The paint was peeling so badly that only half the letters were legible. The metal was corroded, covered in rust and grime like it had been sitting there for decades. I drove this route all the time. That sign was new. It had been replaced less than a year ago. I remembered seeing the construction crew working on it. This wasn't the same sign. That's weird, I muttered, slowing down slightly. That sign wasn't like that last month. No response. I looked over at the passenger seat. It was empty. The door was still closed. The seatbelt was still unbuckled, exactly how he'd left it. But he was gone. I slammed on the brakes. The car skidded slightly on the loose gravel of the shoulder before coming to a stop. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I sat there, hands shaking, staring at the empty seat. No sound of a door opening, no sign of movement outside. He was just gone. I reached over and touched the seat. It was damp. Not soaked, not wet like someone had spilled something, but damp. Cold, like someone had been sitting there in wet clothes for hours. I don't remember much of the drive after that. I know I kept going. I know I made it to the hotel. I remember sitting in the parking lot for 20 minutes with the engine running, too scared to get out of the car. When I finally went inside, the clerk asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine. I wasn't. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him sitting there in the passenger seat, staring forward with those empty eyes. The next morning, I did something stupid. I searched online for accidents on State Highway 47. It didn't take long. I found an article from 2014, 5 years earlier. A man named Daniel Cormier had been driving west on Highway 47 late at night when his car broke down. He'd tried to flag down help, but no one stopped. His body was found the next morning, less than a mile from where I'd picked up the hitchhiker. Cause of death? Hypothermia. The article included a photo. It was him. Same dark coat, same pale face, same empty expression. Here's the part I don't tell people. A week later, I checked my car. I'd left it parked in my driveway for a few days, and when I finally got back in, I noticed the passenger seat. It was still damp. I turned the heater on full blast and let it run for 30 minutes. Still damp. I left the car in the sun for an entire afternoon with the windows cracked. Still damp. I tried everything. Towels, a hairdryer, even a portable dehumidifier. Nothing worked. That seat stayed cold and damp no matter what I did. Eventually, I sold the car. I didn't tell the buyer why. If you've ever taken a taxi late at night, you know how quiet those rides usually are. A few polite words at the beginning, maybe some background radio, then silence. That's what I expected the night this happened. Instead, I got something I still think about every time I sit in the back seat of a stranger's car. This happened in early November of 2021. I was 27, living alone in a mid-sized city and working late shifts at a marketing firm downtown. That night, I stayed later than usual, past midnight, trying to finish a presentation my boss needed the next morning. By the time I stepped outside, the streets were almost completely empty. Cold air hit my face immediately, the kind of cold that sneaks under your clothes and settles into your bones. I opened the rideshare app and requested a taxi. ETA, 3 minutes. The car arrived quicker than expected. A dark sedan pulled up to the curb. No music, no headlights flashing, no driver greeting me through the window. I hesitated before opening the door. That was my first warning sign. The driver was an older man, late 50s, maybe early 60s. Gray hair, thin build, wearing a plain jacket that looked too light for the weather. He didn't turn around when I got in, didn't say hello, didn't ask my name. The door shut with a heavy thud, and the car started moving immediately. I buckled my seatbelt and glanced at the dashboard clock. 12:41 a.m. The meter started running. Still, the driver said nothing. We'd gone maybe 3 blocks when he spoke. "You know," he said calmly, staring straight ahead, "most people don't realize how many people die in the back seat of cars." The sudden sound of his voice made me jump. I guess not," I replied. He nodded slowly, like I'd confirmed something important. "Heart attacks, stabbings, overdoses," he continued. "Sometimes people fall asleep back there and never wake up." I forced a small laugh. "That's comforting." He didn't react, didn't smile, just kept driving. A few minutes passed. Then he started talking again. "I once picked up a woman from the hospital," he said. "She was crying, wouldn't stop shaking." I shifted in my seat, listening despite myself. "She told me her husband had just died upstairs. Brain hemorrhage, no warning, just gone." He paused at a red light, then added quietly, "She didn't know he'd been dead for 3 hours already." I frowned. "How would you know that?" The light turned green. "I drove him to the hospital earlier that night," he said. "He never made it inside." My stomach tightened. I realized then that he still hadn't looked at me. Not once. Not in the mirror. Not when I spoke. Not even briefly. His eyes stayed locked on the road ahead, unblinking. I tried to change the subject. "So, busy night?" I asked. He exhaled slowly through his nose. "It's always busy at night. That's when people lose things." "Lose things," I repeated. "Time. Blood. Hope." We drove in silence for another minute before he spoke again. "You remind me of someone," he said. My heart skipped. "Oh?" I asked. "A man I drove last winter," he continued. "Sat right where you're sitting." I swallowed. "What happened to him?" The car slowed slightly. "He disappeared," the driver said. I laughed nervously. "Disappeared how?" He finally glanced at the rearview mirror. For the first time since I got in, his eyes met mine. "They never found him," he said. I looked away, suddenly uncomfortable. That's when he said my name. My full name. I froze. "I didn't tell you my name," I said. He nodded. "No, you didn't." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, pretending to check a message. No signal. The app was frozen. The map hadn't updated in several minutes. We weren't on my usual route anymore. The driver spoke again, his voice softer now. "Want to hear the worst one?" he asked. I didn't answer. "I once drove a man who told me he could see when people were going to die," he continued. "Said it was like a shadow clinging to them." My breathing quickened. "He told me I had one too," the driver said. My chest tightened. "And do I?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "It's sitting in the back seat," he said. "Right behind you." I leaned forward. "Pull over," I said. "Right now." The driver slowed. Not abruptly. Not in a hurry. Just enough to feel deliberate. We stopped under a flickering streetlight. The meter kept running. I reached for the door handle. Before I could open it, he spoke one last time. "You should know," he said. "Everyone who sits back there hears the stories." My hand froze. But only the ones who are supposed to remember them. I threw the door open and stumbled out onto the sidewalk. The cold air hit me like a wall. The taxi pulled away immediately, disappearing down the street. I stood there shaking, watching the red taillights fade into the distance. The next day, I checked the ride history in my app. There was no record of the trip. No driver name, no vehicle information, no receipt. Just a gap in my history where that ride should have been. I don't take taxis late at night anymore. And when a driver starts telling stories in the dark, I listen carefully. Because some stories aren't meant to entertain. They're meant to warn you. If you've ever driven alone at night, you know the feeling I'm talking about. That moment when you become aware of another car on the road, not because it's doing anything obvious, but because it's been there too long. This happened to me in the winter of 2020. I've never told the full story out loud before, mostly because it sounds paranoid when you say it quickly. But the details matter, and once you hear them all together, I think you'll understand why I still check my mirrors more than I should. I was 24 at the time, driving home from visiting a friend in a neighboring state. I'd stayed later than planned, and by the time I hit the highway, it was already past midnight. The route I took shaved about 40 minutes off the drive, but it came with a downside. Nearly 50 miles of rural two-lane highway with no cell service. No rest stops, no towns, just farmland and forest. I remember hesitating before turning onto it, but I was tired and wanted to be home. That was my first mistake. The night was clear but moonless. The road stretched forward like a ribbon of dull gray, swallowed by darkness on both sides. My headlights were the only thing giving the world any shape at all. I checked my mirrors out of habit. Empty road behind me. About 20 minutes in, I noticed headlights in my rearview mirror. Nothing unusual at first. Cars catch up, Pass, move on. That's normal. What caught my attention was how far back they were. The headlights stayed small and distant, never getting closer, never falling behind, just hovering there at the exact same distance, like they were locked into my speed perfectly. I sped up slightly. So did they. I slowed down. They slowed too. That's when I felt the first flicker of unease. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe the driver was tired like me. Maybe they were using cruise control. Maybe they were just being cautious on a dark road. To test it, I took my foot off the gas entirely and let the car coast. The headlights dimmed as they slowed, matching me exactly. Still no attempt to pass. On a two-lane road this empty, that was strange. Eventually, the headlights crept closer, just enough for me to make out the shape of the vehicle. It was an older sedan, dark-colored, no distinguishing features. No fog lights, no roof rack, no decals. Just a car. But something was wrong with the headlights. They weren't aligned. One sat slightly higher than the other, giving the car an uneven, crooked stare, like it was looking at me wrong. I adjusted my mirror. That's when I noticed there was no license plate light. The back of the car was completely dark. About 10 miles later, I reached a narrow county road cutting into the trees. On impulse, I slowed down and turned. I watched my mirror as I did. The car behind me didn't hesitate. It turned too. My stomach dropped. There was no reason for anyone to take that road. At some point, the radio cut out. Not static. Not fading. Just silence. I tried to turn it back on. Nothing. The dashboard clock flickered. I checked my phone. No signal. The car behind me crept closer. Not aggressively, not tailgating, just close enough that its headlights filled my mirror. I couldn't see the driver, only darkness. I sped up. So did it. The engine sound behind me stayed perfectly steady, like it wasn't working hard at all. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The headlights cast no shadows. The trees reacted to my lights, not theirs. The road straightened into a long stretch with a broken yellow line, a legal passing zone. I slowed down and hugged the shoulder. Any normal driver would have passed. It didn't. It stayed behind me, waiting. Without warning, the headlights turned off. For half a second, the road behind me was pitch black. Then, they turned back on. Closer than before. Much closer. I hit the gas. The speedometer climbed. The car behind me kept pace effortlessly. My hands were shaking. I glanced at the mirror again. And this time, I saw something inside the car. Not a face. A shape. Tall. Sitting too high. And it wasn't looking at the road. It was looking at me. Headlights appeared ahead. Oncoming traffic. Relief hit me instantly. As the car passed, I checked my mirror again. The road behind me was empty. No headlights. No car. Nothing. When I got home, I checked my dash cam. The footage from that drive was corrupted. All except one still frame. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. It showed my car from behind, and parked inches away was a dark sedan. Headlights off. No driver visible. No license plate. I don't take that road anymore. And when I notice a car behind me at night that won't pass, I don't slow down. I don't turn. I just keep driving. Because some things don't follow you to get somewhere. They follow you to see if you notice.